This conference will now be recorded.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest SCLF webinar, which is webinar 12 already. And this one is to provide an introduction to the construction waste portal. Today's webinar is going to be given by John Logan, who has over 30 years experience in environmental and sustainability management, with the last 12 years being spent in construction. John's also a former regulator who served some time with SEPA, did 10 years with SEPA as a regulator. And the construction waste portal is John's brainchild, and he's going to just give us a bit of an introduction to that just now. So without further ado, I will hand over to John, who should still be with us. Let me just double check.
Yes, I'm still here, Alison.
Yeah, just checking you're still there. Okay, so if you just want to share your screen, then we can get going.
Yeah, it was interesting that you made the 10 years at SEPA sound like a jail term.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's a bit of an icebreaker.
I get out after 4, so.
Well, firstly, thank you everyone for the opportunity today to talk to you about the website. It's been essentially an obsession for about the last 2 years of my life. The idea first came to me back in September 2018 when I came up with an idea of how we could match industry data to remove the risk from waste forecasting and more so the commercial risk associated with that. So I leaned on a few friends in the industry, and before too long, lots of data started flowing. So the website that I'm going to show you today is based on historic data from just under 900 completed projects across the UK, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end. When I start the presentation, my contact details are there. Please feel free to take a note of those, and there's also social media details for the website itself on the final slide. So without too much further delay, I'll just get going. So hopefully everyone can see this now. So in terms of the construction industry, I'll set a scene for you. The industry itself provides approximately 8% of UK GDP, with an approximate turnover of £120 billion a year. It's also a very big employer. As you can see there, the 3 million people is an approximation, and there's a very large number of companies, and you can imagine that goes from tier 1 contractors all the way down through to the very smallest companies in the supply chain. Currently, and for the last number of years, has produced around 60% of all UK waste in the UK, approximately 120 million tonnes, sorry, at the last count. And interestingly, construction also accounts for 50% of all natural resource extraction across the EU. So it's a very big contributor to the resource drain that we currently put on the planet. The cost of dealing with construction waste is estimated to sit at around £6.5 billion a year. And staggeringly, 30% of all profit on UK construction projects is lost to overspend on waste. And there are a number of factors involved in that, which we'll examine shortly. A good development for me is the producer obligations, which are part of the new Environment Bill, which put an onus on construction companies to set targets for reductions on targeted waste during a project. And we've built a facility for that into the website as well, which I'll show you when we get to the actual demonstration. So the factors that influence construction waste, for me, there are 7 of them. Now you'll notice in the bottom right hand corner, the company name is Mudataco. Now Muda is the Japanese word for waste, and there are 7 principles in terms of waste production, which were initially founded by a gentleman called Taiichi Ono in 1968 when he worked at the Toyota organisation. And he came up with the idea of lean production principles. So I've taken a slant in terms of construction application, and I'll happily explain those to you to you now. So the first one is inventory. The inventory costs you money, and until it's installed and paid for, those materials and that equipment are yours. In addition to the direct costs of both, there remains the risk of indirect costs associated with storage, space, packaging, transport, and most likely damage to the materials. The waste of inventory masks the risk of other wasteful activities in the system, and while just-in-time deliveries are a utopia in production terms, a just-in-case ideology normally means overproduction and over-procurement of materials. The next one is time. Now, time is money, that's just fact, but time is also one commodity that nobody has a surplus of. So why do so many of our operations rely on others? Whether it's material deliveries, waiting on design clarifications, plant being repaired, accident downtime, or excess travel times, we spend a lot of our time in our working lives waiting on responses. This is an obvious waste with negative impacts, and the waste of waiting also disrupts program and therefore flow, increasing stress levels in an already time-bound process. That program risk in construction terms is the most serious of all the wastes, with potentially major commercial impact on a company from failing to meet the contractual deliverable in terms of handing over on time. So as well as the additional overhead costs, many contracts have financial penalties for overrunning in terms of liquidated damages. The waste of underproduction is a result of many factors: long material lead times based on commodity demand, poor supplier relations, and weather, to name a few. But these issues can also cause a desire to recover that time quickly, tipping the delicate equilibrium of time and activity to a state where it can be out of control. So in trying to recover that, it is not easy. It's not simply a case of dedicating more staff to the tasks or more resources. Doesn't necessarily mean more time, productivity and capability. And if it's not managed properly, it can actually add to wasted time and procurement. There's also the additional cost of that resource, adding to overhead and prelim costs when the potential project already may be sweating commercially. And commonly it also means increasing the physical production of wasted materials and subsequent procurement, with the inevitable ill-considered but direct costs. Defects is the most obvious and should be the easiest of all the waste to identify and eliminate before they're identified by your customer. Defects in quality inevitably cause more money than expected to be spent in terms of rectification through rework and replacement of those materials, and it can ultimately lead to a wasted reputation via dissatisfied customers. Measure twice, cut once is an old cliche, but one which is ever more apt in an environment which can be stressed with the wastes of time and overproduction. Repetition is a final or second from final one, and lessons learned does not necessarily always mean lessons heeded. Most companies have quality systems, at the heart of which is the mantra of plan, do, check, and act. Yet these are also affected and habitually replaced by plan, try, fail, repeat, where the lessons that are learned on previous projects are not necessarily heeded. And that can affect the behaviour and the culture within an organisation, which can actually lead to an industry-led requirement to change how things are done. And the final waste is that of resource, and I've put a kind of personal slant on this in terms of that being people. In construction, resource efficiency is often regarded as being a symptom of environmentalism. But driving efficiencies in water use, energy consumption and waste are commonly overlooked, disregarding the fact that doing so can save time and money through reducing the impact of those aspects. However, the most overlooked waste for me is that of people. We still operate as an industry in a command and control environment where it can be difficult to influence how things have always been done, through opinion and innovation being largely discarded. And a simple way of reducing waste is to actually have good staff engagement, and that can also be a fairly low cost factor in helping the process. So what do these factors and symptoms relate to? Well, first of all, 9 times out of 10 it relates to tender price stress. There is always a desire to try and put together a package that makes you more attractive to a client than another bidder, and that's commonly done on cost. And post-COVID, the recessionary conditions that we saw back in 2010 are more than likely to to recur. So what that means is that clients and their advisors looking for £50 million buildings to be constructed for £40 million means that the whole process of procurement and programme is already stressed before you've even got to site. So the pressure to reduce the cost of waste in particular can be an easy hit when it comes to that allocation within a tender. And also tender processes themselves can be very quick, which means normally you don't have enough time to even look at a bill of quantities in terms of applying the standard bath inventory factors to produce some kind of forecast for the waste, let alone a detailed forecast itself. And that obviously is a lack of viable, robust data, unless it's within the company itself. That leads you to make poor decisions in terms of deciding on the waste company that you're going to employ on the project. Is normally based on price, and as we know, that that's labelled as being the most economic. However, it also leads to profit impact from the additional cost of the poor forecasting, but also opens you up to considerable regulatory risk in terms of waste transfer notes, potential fly tipping, and in England in particular, the Environment Agency have now employed a team of waste misclassification enforcement officers, which means if your transfer note has the wrong description of the material on it, then it leaves you open to regulatory intervention. What happens when it goes wrong? There's a couple of case studies that are prepared. This one was a project I was actually personally involved in, and it was back in the autumn of 2018. It was a large commercial office development. There was a nominal 50k tender allowance included in the project price, and the project ended up spending 450k on waste. Now that 400k overspend related to a 40% overspend, 40% representation of the available profit on the project from the outset. The second one was a kind of wider study that I did while I was developing the website, and I looked at 47 live projects across the UK. However, only 12 of them were on target against the tender allowance, meaning that the 35 that remained, 21 were already beyond the midpoint of the programme, meaning that there were 14 horror stories in terms of the commercial sweat that we saw in case study 1 being a risk. It comes down to guesswork. Any estimator will tell you that sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. But when you ask them how they've come up with a tender allowance, it's usually a couple of rungs down the ladder from being even an educated guess. So when we start to build these risks into the job from the start, it's very quickly evident that they're going to compound themselves into commercial pain. I mentioned earlier that the website is based on data from 900 completed projects across the UK. So what we did was we worked with a team of data scientists, both from an academic background and a commercial background, and we looked at the geography of the areas, and we basically mapped the UK in terms of postcode and where the projects took place. And then we applied data science to the various data points within the waste set, so the total waste and then the breakdown, to look at how we could forecast the waste based on building type, size and location. Come up with what we believe to be an integrated platform for forecasting, costing and monitoring waste, and hopefully I can evidence that when I show you the portal itself. There's nothing else like it on the market. The closest thing to it is probably BRE's Smart Waste, but that doesn't have the commercial linkage that the portal has. It's a live marketplace, so it constantly evolves based on either historic data input from contractors or through waste contractors using their side of the portal to update their commercial rates. We're looking for it to drive improved standards in resource management, both on site, but also in terms of the wider waste and resource management sector through promotion of the circular economy and looking at other sort of uses of the commodities that are in the skips when they leave site. We're looking also for it to make informed cost decisions for clients and have a bit of transparency, but also to incentivise the supply chain I'm sure any tier 1 or tier 2 contractors would tell you that, they don't really produce any direct waste. The vast majority of it is produced through the supply chain being on site. We're looking for it to drive resource reuse and commodity recovery. And I mentioned earlier that contractors continuing to share data or uploading data to the portal when a project's complete will continue to mature the data sets in various postcode areas across the UK. Various bodies such as Zero Waste Scotland, UK Green Building Council, Construction Scotland Innovation Centre have described the website as a potential game changer. So that's very pleasing. I mentioned the live marketplace. The waste data is matched to zonal postcode areas across the UK. Now, I lost 2 weeks of my life mapping all of those postcodes, so I'm now actively campaigning against new housing developments, for example, because I don't want new postcodes coming into play, and the forecasts are data science driven. Based on basic parameters for a project in terms of type and also the gross internal floor area, and as I said before, matched in a mirror sort of capacity to live commercial rates within those same postcode zones. There's a lot of variation in the data, and the data science would apply different models, and the range that the data is forecast in is based on a lot of statistical evaluation and standard deviation evaluation from within the data set. We have thousands of data points, and we've used that to come up with the forecasts. So we did a real project test, and for the purposes of commercial confidence, I've anonymised the project, however the outcomes are real. So the project was approximately 22,000 square metres with a tender value of 41 million. Now the tender allowance for the waste estimate was around 121,000, which most financial guys on a project would tell you is a reasonable estimate. So when we ran the project data through the portal, it came out with just over £250,000 worth of value. Now that's a considerable difference compared to the tender allowance. However, the actual waste spend on the project was just over 306,000. So that was 2.5 times the existing allowance that the commercial guys had built into the project. And that was £185,000 overspend, had an 11.2% effect on the profit margin. And to normalise the assessment, we based that on a nominal 4% margin on the tender price. The overspend using the portal was just under 42,000. So even although there was an overspend, it had a significantly less effect on the profit margin. And the 8.7% saving equated to some £143,000 of a retained profit, which could have been held by the contractor if they had used the portal estimate instead of the tender allowance. So the beneficiaries of the system, there are many in our opinion. Clients and developers are a key one for us, to be honest with you. Every single tender that lands on someone in the construction industry's desk will say, please provide us with a site waste management plan. A site waste management plan is absolutely hopeless without having a forecast, because if you don't have a forecast, you don't have a baseline. So how can you set reduction targets on waste and all the ancillaries that go with that if you don't have a starting point? Designers is another obvious one for potential design alterations to save materials being wasted, and the commercial guys and environmental guys within construction companies would be probably the foremost beneficiaries from it too. Management and resource management companies as well. During lockdown, we actually brought forward some significant development plans which we were holding towards the end of the year. So in terms of just being a linear waste prediction tool now, we have implemented changes which also allow companies to source recycled aggregates. So we're trying to make it a more rounded, true, sort of sustainable site. And we are currently coding an embodied carbon calculator for the waste that's forecast on each project. Excuse me. And we're hoping that that will be live on the system within 3 to 4 weeks. Industry associations and advisory bodies, we've worked really closely with Zero Waste Scotland, Green Compass, UK Green Building Council and the London Waste and Recycling Board, all of whom are giving the portal some serious traction and some serious attention. And we have a couple of pilot projects that are being proposed for the London area in conjunction with the DEFRA project, which is on the go just now in terms of the full digital tracking of waste from cradle to grave, and then hopefully reintroduction into the supply chain through recycled materials. And market analysts and data analysts are people who would probably like to get their hands on some of the data as well. So we're looking to collaborate on that. So in a summary, it is a unique science-based application. It's not just a forecasting tool that's based on averages. There is an industry need. There's no doubt about that in terms of the amount of money that could potentially be retained by construction companies in terms of profit, and at a time where redundancies is still a spectre as a result of COVID. Having that money retained within the industry would mean that it could potentially safeguard jobs or drive improvement standards, etc. And it also promotes collaboration on data sharing. The construction industry is wonderful at talking about collaboration, but it's actually very poor in terms of delivering on that. Which is why the data that the website is based on has been provided by 10 major contractors in the UK, which is very pleasing. And through awareness of the website, there are another half a dozen who are currently weighing up, making a contribution in that respect as well. Looking for it to create a competitive, and progressive marketplace within the waste and resource management sector. We don't want the website to be essentially a digital shop window where everyone and anyone can advertise their service capability. We want the companies who are forward thinking, who are reinvesting money into their services and their certifications, to be the companies who want to be on here. We want the cream of the resource management sector to realise that the avenue that it would open to them in terms of construction industry, it would be quite an open one. An obvious reduction in the commercial risk on waste, and as I say, we're looking for the target setting capability of the website to drive resource efficiency and best practice. I mentioned earlier we're currently coding an embodied carbon calculator, so when you see the forecasts from the website, which I'll show you shortly, we're looking at the standardisation and application of factors for each of those waste types. We're currently talking to both Zero Waste Scotland and the University of Edinburgh regarding the most appropriate factors to apply to each of the waste streams. So although I kind of use the compare the meerkat analogy, it's not about market intelligence, it's about creating an intelligent marketplace where the forecasting and the drive towards better resourcing, forecasting and resource efficiency within the industry is much more slick than it currently is at the moment. And it's about using that data to everyone's advantage. The website is a tool that's essentially been developed in collaboration by the industry, so it would be wrong to make it a sort of selfish commercial tool when there's the obvious betterment of practice and supply chain practice within the industry, and that's the main ethos of the site. So what I'll do now is I'll come out of the presentation and I'll show you the website itself. So hopefully everyone can see this. If you can't, Alison, can you let me know? Unless I hear otherwise, I'll go on the assumption that you can hear.
No, it's fine.
So,
It's fine. It's fine, John.
okay, thank you. So the contributors carousel, which you can see scrolling along the bottom, has some fairly big names on there in terms of the industry and the provision of data. There has also been a lot of support from Scottish Enterprise, who were very supportive of it. And prior to COVID, we were set up to have some PR with the First Minister, who was intending using the website while visiting the new Barclays facility on the Clyde, but that didn't happen, obviously, with other priorities. So there is a lot of support for the project, and if you would like to get in contact, if you think there's a way that you can collaborate or contribute, or even to find out more, please feel free to contact me at any point after today. So what I'll do is I'll show you some basics on how, for example, a waste contractor would set up, and also how I would use the tool as a contractor. So I mentioned earlier about the postcodes across the UK. So I've set up a dummy account here, and I'll show you how we set up using that. So there are 6 basic tabs which a waste contractor would sign up to. Now, if we apply all of the UK, you can see that there are a lot of areas on here. And if you float over the wee tooltip, you'll see the various postcode areas where you can refine the area that you actually operate in. So, for example, if I was only going to operate in Glasgow, you simply uncheck the areas where you're not going to be working. And then when you're set, it essentially then sets up the template for you to set your commercial rates. Sorry, I need to go back in. I missed a point there. So let's assume that I'm going to be both a waste contractor and a recycled aggregates manufacturer. So what that then does is it sets up the cost template for the areas in which I serve. And what I do here is simply insert the price of a 12-yard skip. 12-yard was the standard skip size which come back as a result of a survey of the waste management industry in terms of what they normally put into the construction industry. And then there are some additional boxes here where if you want to have a number of tons, which is the maximum allowable, any financial penalty that you're going to have for a skip being overweight, and then a free text box so that you can input some sales comments. So if you only supply a 14-yard skip, for example, you can caveat the price for the 12-yard. So then we move on to recycled aggregates. And again, this is a very simple table where you insert the price per tonne of the recycled materials that you supply, and we have different delivery radii down the left-hand side. You can also upload the technical specifications for those materials, and then you have very brief sales comments box. The number of text that you can put in there is unlimited, and in the upload facility you can also attach photographs, etc. The services tab is a very important one. How do we differentiate between companies if we're not just talking about cost? Well, as an environmental person, I put together a list of 10 criteria that I would expect to see if I was going to audit a waste management contractor that I was looking at. So on the list here, you'll see there are 12 boxes. Now 10 of the boxes qualify for what we're calling a half a star in terms of a star rating facility. The 2 which don't is the COVID-19 risk assessments, which is a document which we would expect most companies to have now, and those companies who wish to advertise their earthworks capability in terms of muck shift, etc. So let's assume that we have 9001, 14001, we have Achilles or Construction Line, we're a member of Resource Management Association Scotland, and we also offer online reporting and transfer notes linked to our reporting and invoicing. I then simply update my services after I've uploaded the documents, and that basically sets the profiles. So what I'll do now is I'll log out of this account and I'll go into my live account, and I'll show you what I would use the system for. So this is me in my actual live page for McLaughlin and Harvey account. So if, for example, I'm looking to build a new office in Glasgow, I then simply click the waste forecasting and pricing. Let's assume a new office in Glasgow. We'll pick a G2 postcode. There's then various sectors. Now, some of the sectors, the data is really strong, and some of them we would like it to be a lot better, particularly residential and also civil engineering. We're currently talking to Civil Engineering Contractors Association and trying to promote how we can use that data. The difficulty in comparing the data on a civil engineering perspective with the built environment is that the gross internal floor area of a building is one of the determining factors, and it's based on a sort of 100 square metre nominal value. However, how many factors of 100 square metres do you have in a 5-mile motorway that's 6 lanes and 2 hard shoulders wide? So we're trying to come up with smarter ways of being able to evaluate that data. So let's assume there's going to be an office. It's a nominal 5,000 square and it's 10 million. And the start and stop date in terms of program you can adjust, and I'll show you why that's important as we progress. So then I simply click get the results, and here we have the results page. You can see how quick it was based on the data science for the Central Scotland and Glasgow area. We're projected to produce 270 tonnes there or thereabouts of waste, and the breakdown for that is around 61% general waste, 15% inert, timber factors, metal, plasterboard, and others. Now, other obviously includes things like glass and plastic and packaging. And what we're trying to do is achieve sort of more granularity in that data that would allow that to be further broken out, but we don't have that level of detail at the moment, which is where we're hoping that the DEFRA project and those companies who are past 402 certified will start to produce cleaner data on that. So the reason that we split it down is to get a better understanding of the waste streams, but also to start the smart conversations with the supply chain. So if you know that you're going to produce roughly 6% of your waste as plasterboard, you should be sitting down with your plasterboard or dry lining contractor at tender stage and driving reduction actions into the heart of the planning within the site waste management plan, and the same with timber. So once you have that focus, you know where to start having those conversations. So we move on to the waste contractors who advertise in the area. Now, these are live commercial rates. These companies are actually on the system just now. So the price range that's here is worked out on how the 270 tonnes of waste is actually produced on site. Any of you who have been to a construction site know that most skips are around 75 to 80% fresh air because they're so poorly packed, which is why there's a discrepancy between the expected tonnage, best practice tonnage, which is achieved through better practice on packing skips as well as waste minimisation, to the higher end of the tonnage. There's not a straight linearity of this. And the reason behind that is when we looked at the scatter of the data points for each individual skip, it was like watching a comet flying through space. There was the neat pointed end, which was the best practice side, and then the wide scatter at the tail, where skips were poorly packed and there was a significant number of them. So I can sort the contractors either by price or by star rating. So I can see here that there are couple of companies who are 3-star rated, and this one appears a bit less expensive. So if I click on the company logo, I can see their contact details, I can see how their star rating is made up, and I can see a bit about the company. So I can click on the icon next to their certification and see their quality system. And I can also click on the other icon and have a look at their carrier's license. So I can do the basic regulatory checks that I need to do before I even get into discussion with them. What we're hoping to do is, I know that the Environment Agency in particular are currently undertaking an exercise to bring all of their public sector permits into one place. So we're waiting until that goes in place before we then try and link to the public register so that all of the documentation would be live. Now I can simply then save those rates or accept them. If I want to accept them, what would happen is the system would send an email to this company saying, McLaughlin and Harvey, I've sent you an inquiry regarding supporting a project. Do you want to accept? However, for the purposes of demo, I'll just simply save them. So you'll see there that it goes into my saved folder. So then if we win the project, I can then accept the results, accept the quotation, and again, it will serve the company with an email, or if I want to delete it, if I don't win the job, I can simply do that. Now, I have one live project. When I look at the saved searches as well, you'll see that there's a button in terms of going to live. This means that I can actually push the project to live if I want it. And what that does is it will set up the reporting template which is built into the system. So if I look at the live projects I have at the moment, this is Buchanan Wharf. And for the purposes of today's demonstration, I've built in some dummy data to it. Now, I mentioned earlier regarding the target setting. So most public sector buildings and private sector buildings now have a requirement for a BREEAM rating. So you can select the number of BREEAM credits that you're going to have to achieve. And you can also decide to assess your own reduction target against the tonnage that the system forecasts. So let's assume that we're going for an aggressive 15% reduction, and then simply save those. Excuse me. And then monthly, when you get your waste data, you put in the waste breakdown that you have here. Now, if I just go back and I widen these BREEAM credits somewhat, just to make the graph a bit more visible. You'll see that what the system does is it creates a tracker for you throughout the construction program, which is where the project start and stop dates were important, because that actually builds your whole reporting template for the duration of the project. So you can use the system as a monthly tracker to be able to see, you know, if you've got any upcoming works where you know there's going to be a lot of waste production, say, you know, joinery package or plasterboard, you can take precautionary measures to try and minimise that through talking to the subcontractors and getting that early engagement that you would seek to have to drive that process. As I say, this is nominal data that I've put into for the purposes of showing you the tracker graph. Now, when the project's complete, I have the option here of hitting the complete button, and what that does is it takes the data from the project. It doesn't take any of the commercial data. All it takes is the postcode and the gross internal floor area together with the waste data, and it takes it up into the cloud. The system does some sanity checks on it to make sure that it's not rogue data or in a flyer against the data that the system is built on. And if it meets those security checks and different criteria, it would then be absorbed into the data set for that area so that it continually matures and improves those searches. Now, one thing I can do, and it's completely free of charge, is I can add historic data. So even if someone decided that they didn't want to subscribe to the system, they can still contribute to industry collaboration and betterment through adding data for projects across the UK. And you can add any number of projects. And again, it's a simple setup on the project type, gross internal floor area, and the postcode. You'll see that there is no commercially confidential information in terms of project name or value. The postcode itself, we only require the first part of the postcode, so G2. We don't need G2 4PB, for example, because that would allow people to pinpoint a project on Google Maps. So, and then if you have the total waste and then the granularity that we would require for the forecasting, then you simply save the data, and again, it puts it up into the cloud, and the algorithms are then applied to the data, and it's absorbed if it passes those checks. You can add an unlimited number of users, so these are people within the McLaughlin and Harvey organisation who are currently using the system. And to be honest with you, that is essentially that. You'll see down here we have some learning tips. There's a wee bit about who we are, the 7 aspects of waste that we spoke about earlier. I've put each of those in as kind of learning tips so that you can use them, and feel free to use them as extracts on any blogs or any quotes that you want to put together. A useful links tab, which takes us to various industry bodies and their websites, and then how to contact us and the usual legalities in terms of conditions of having an online platform. And that's essentially it. So I'm hoping that that's been of interest, and at least giving you something to think about in terms of what we're trying to do to drive better standards within the industry, and make it commercially robust, but also improve the interface between the construction industries and the waste management sector as well, because they generally don't talk to each other unless they really have to. However, if we're talking about improving resource efficiency, driving circularity, we need the biggest waste producer in the UK, and probably one of the larger industries as well, to start communicating more effectively than we currently do. So I'll happily stop sharing my screen now, and let Alison field any questions that we have.
That's great. Thank you very much, John. That was really interesting. I'll just stop the recording just now, and we've got some time for some questions, and there's a couple in the chat. So thank you very much again, John, for contributing to our series. That was great.
Thank you.